Hello everybody, my name is Eduardo and I'm a communication trainer based here in Berlin. And the focus of my work is to train teams and leaders to communicate better and to function better together. And tonight we're talking about new work, which is one of those wonderful buzzwords that have emerged to indicate something because there is a lot of interest about it. So let's take a look at that first. Let's take a look at what we know is happening. So we know that work is changing. We know that there is a technologically backed change process taking place. We can call it digitalization, fourth industrial revolution, digital transformation processes, different things indicating slightly different other things. But we know that because of this, work will look completely different in just a few years. And the interesting part about this is that some of these changes we can expect based on what we know, and some others we still have no idea about. So what we need, both in order to deal with the way work will look like and to cope with the uncertainty of the change itself, is a new set of skills, of organizational structures, of tools that will allow us precisely to do that. And one of these tools is leadership. And the question in this sense becomes, what does our role as a leader look like in a few years? Or how do we lead a team that will become increasingly exposed to this sort of changes and will be exposed to this uncertainty? So that is the question I want to talk about tonight. I don't want to say give an answer because I am not the gospel, but I'm going to try my best. So the starting point needs to be necessarily the team. So what kind of behaviors can we expect from a team entering a situation like that? And interestingly, we can expect two. The first one is instinctive. In a situation of uncertainty, which can be interpreted as a sort of danger because it makes us feel uneasy, we don't really like change, we react instinctively by looking for something that makes us feel safe. And this is something that goes back to the Ice Age, if you wish. If you were out hunting as a caveman and you found a saber-toothed tiger on your way, you would have wanted to hide and find shelter. Now, saber-toothed tigers, of course, don't exist anymore, which I also find a pity because they look awesome. But apart from this, the instinct remains. And when it comes to work, it means that we will choose to do something that makes us feel safe, which means use a tool we are experts in, use a routine we really know very well. And interestingly, this will happen even if we know consciously that that tool or that routine is not adapted to the situation. I'm going to give you a practical example in a second. But first I want to talk about the second possible behavior, which is, of course, exactly the opposite. Meaning finding something else, foregoing our instinct, if we manage, and deciding to let everything go and make do with what we have available. And this is actually a process that's been studied, and it's called organizational improvisation. Improvisation because you need to make do with what you have and do a step-by-step process. And organizational because it usually happens and was studied in organizations. Clear, right? And so there is an interesting case study that compared the two. In the 70s, there was a fire in a national park, Man Gulch Park in the States, and they called in a team of firefighters to extinguish the fire. Of course, they knew what they were doing. They had been briefed on the fire itself, on the type of wood, on the rain, on the wind, so they had a few ideas of what they could do. However, when they went in, they found that the fire was not following any pattern of behavior that they knew. And they found themselves trapped in the fire. So, oh, there's a lot of people coming. Love it. So, please sit down. don't be scared. So, these people found themselves trapped in the fire and without any tool at their disposal that would help them figure out how to behave. And interestingly, the large majority of the team decided to stick with the routines that they knew, even though they recognized that the fire was not, they recognized that they were not adapted to the fire. Whereas a minority managed to let everything go and come up with a solution that was absolutely out of the book, meaning they started a second fire. But this allowed them to build themselves a way out of it and survive, whereas the other ones died, unfortunately. Now, this is an extreme example, of course. We're not dealing with life or death situations, we're not dealing with extinguishing fires, but it shows us exactly how those two behaviors can affect us and can affect the behavior of our team. And it shows us that in those situations, improvising something doesn't offer us any guarantee of success. But sticking to what we know because it makes us feel good gives us almost a guarantee of failure. So in these conditions, when this uncertainty hits hard, our role as a leader becomes to make sure that we have the right conditions so that our team can enter this state of improvisation, and make sure that they do it well, because that's going to up our chances of finding a solution. Does that make sense so far? Okay, great. So, let's start with the beginning. What conditions do we need? We need two. The first one is experimental culture. We need to make sure that a company we work in and the team we lead has this experimental culture. And we're pretty good with that in Berlin, because we have all the startup culture coming in, which is exactly respecting that, and it's already oozing into corporates. And this means, in practice, promoting working via trial and error, not punishing mistakes, but making sure that people feel rewarded for the learning they provided, communicating clearly about this. Because this will give people the freedom to think that they can try things out. And connected to that, making sure that the structure of work becomes minimal. And I'm not talking here about the organizational structure. I'm talking about how you, as the leader, structure the process of work. Meaning that if you like to be the kind of leader that makes sure that all the boxes are ticked about how you want the process to look like and how your people should work like, you're going to place A, a heavy burden on your team, and B, you're going to deprive the people working from the sufficient freedom to experiment, to try things out. So it's much better in the sense to work via long-term goals or milestones. Say, for example, by next June you need to give me this. And once that is given, the person has the full freedom of organizing the work the way he or she sees fit and making up something that is good for that person. So these are the two right conditions that we need to make sure are there. This is background work. And this can give us a good chance that when uncertainty arrives, our team can get cracking in terms of trying to find things that work and not have the need to feel safe necessarily. However, the tricky part, come in, there's a seat there. We were getting worried. We were all thinking about you. Oh. No, the tricky part becomes keeping your team with this idea of improvising or finding a solution with what they have once they're into it. Because this means exposing yourself fully to change, to uncertainty, to making mistakes. And if we have that situation, our little friend, our instinct to feel safe, will kick in even harder. So, in order to figure out how we can keep our team rolling in this sense, we need to take a look at a group of people that manages to do this regularly. And if you know me, or if you've looked me up, you know exactly where I'm going with this, which is, we need to take a look at improvisers. Improvisers in terms of improv comedy, comedians. And I know that I see a few strange faces. Everything is okay, you can be safe here. But granted, improvisers are a group of comedians that make up a funny show for you, which is true. But improvisers are also a team that needs to work together, maybe without even knowing each other, to come up with a product, the show, that the client, the audience, will like and is willing to pay for regularly, maybe a few times every night. And good improvisers manage to do this successfully and repeatedly. It means that they are a team exposed to full uncertainty that manages to work well. So if this is true, and if it is true that we can make a comparison between a team that works professionally to develop a product, it must also be true that we can take a look at what concepts we can take from their way of working and adapt them into our way of working. So improvisers can describe the way they work and the way they train in a million ways. I'm going to stick to research and to 3 concepts that they have identified as relevant. So the first one is being in the moment, which is, there's another chair coming. I'm sorry. It's okay. So being in the moment simply means being able to focus only and specifically on what is happening now, without thinking about the consequences of our actions, without thinking of other possibilities of what we could do, without thinking of the past or maybe retaliation that we might have against a colleague whose choice we didn't like. Just what we see now is all we have. Connected to this, environmental awareness, meaning being able to objectively identify every single detail in your immediate environment. Every offer that the environment gives you, if you wish. And you need to do that in order to be able to process it and bring it in as your material for future work. There is a lot of talk in terms of leadership when it comes to awareness in terms of self-awareness, about being aware of your values, being aware, being mindful, if you wish. That is also relevant, but not for this, not in this situation. The only thing that matters is being able to objectively understand and bring in all the offers that the environment is giving you. And the third one, which is also my favorite, is making the other person look good. On stage, this means that whatever your scene partner does is the material you need to work with. So you need to accept it, and you need to build on that person's ideas and uplift the person's value for the audience. When it comes to a team, if everybody works that way, it means entering a team knowing that every other single person will do everything in their power to make sure that you're listened to, that you're trusted, that your ideas are considered and developed. And that is a pretty strong feeling to have, because it acts as a safety net, and it allows you to think, maybe I can take a risk. I can take a risk that's even heavy because I've got the team having my back. Does that make sense? So, and the interesting part about this is that there are 2 styles of leadership that connect specifically to this concept of making the other person look good. So, just to recap, we know that work is changing. We know that uncertainty will become something that we will need to live with in the future. And we know that our role as the leader will be also to deal with that. We know that our role as the leader will be to enable some conditions at work, to do background work, and will be to lead in a specific way that will have our team stick together and not go back into their shell whenever uncertainty hits. And we can do that using 2 styles of leadership which use this specific concept, which are servant leadership and rotating or shared leadership. Servant leadership, simply put, means that you, as the leader, take over the role of making sure that as much weight is off the shoulders of your teams as you can. You can take care of, they call them menial tasks or administrative tasks, anything that doesn't require creative input. You just take over that, because this allows them to focus only on finding a way that works and finding a way to work for them to give their best. And the other one is rotating or shared leadership, meaning that at any given moment, whoever has the right skills and the right attitude, maybe even, for the situation you're in, automatically takes over the role of the leader, and everybody else gives the person the role of the leader. And whenever the conditions change, or the situation changes, leadership is given to someone else who becomes the right person to lead. So this is equivalent in servant leadership to you making your team look good. And in rotating leadership, it means everybody applying this concept. And you can see, of course, that servant leadership becomes quicker to apply, it becomes faster to apply, quicker and faster are the same thing, it becomes cheaper to apply because you as the leader are the only person that needs to even know about this, and you're the only one that needs to be trained. In rotating leadership, which mimics exactly what happens during an improv show, you and all your team need to be trained in that. So because of this, it becomes more expensive to train, to maintain, because someone else might enter the team that doesn't know anything about this. But it also becomes more fun. So the thing they have in common, however, is this. You can read it on the screen. You need to practice them. You can know about all of this, you can read about it, you can study it, but you need to practice it on yourself and know what it means to be in that state. So my suggestion for when you get back to your team is to do this. First of all, take a good look if the right conditions are there. Not just formally, but for real. Are those two conditions in place? And second, take a look, well, test the concept of making the other person look good on yourself. So take a full day and decide that for that day you're going to behave like this. Whenever somebody asks you a question, you're going to drop anything you're doing and answer that question. Whenever somebody needs help, you're going to do everything in your power to make sure that person is supported. And see how it goes. Test it, see how it works in your organization, for yourself, for your people, and draw your conclusions. It doesn't offer you any guarantee, of course, because the conditions need to be right. But my suggestion is do try it out. And I see some strange faces frowning. If it makes you feel uneasy, uncertain, it's not really for you, think about whether it's not that instinct hitting you, and you might want instead to take a look and try to do something else and find a new way. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, in that case, thank you very much.